intro to transition from yesterday to today in terms of the Gemara. Okay, we're going to acknowledge a year of learning by Sue and Arnie Garelick, in memory of Malka Perlman and Philip Mann, and Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Beryl ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Yosef Meir ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, and Yerivka Perel bas Rosner bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, and in memory of family murdered in the Holocaust, Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Shall share her children and grandchildren in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Harav Akiva. Marcia Federbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Uriel Paul Federbush, Uriel Pinchas ben Harav Shimon, Sharon and Fred Litzker, their family and many friends, in memory of her dear mom, Harriet Friedman, Evel Bas Yaakov, Leslie and Gail Kaplan, in memory of their parents, Harry and Marjorie Sedell, Irving and Pearl Kaplan, friends of Avi Gitler, Avram Meir ben Shimon, and Martha Gitler, Charna Bas Yeshaya, the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of Toby Paris, Sarah Tova bat Yisrael Dov in her memory, friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef, friends of Joe Wolf, Yosef ben Chaim, Charlie Gelfenstein and Sam Levine, in memory of Ramona Levine, Rachel Mata bas Ashi. We have a month of learning sponsored by Mordechai and Miriam Burr, in memory of his father, Yaakov ben Mordechai, by friends from Yarmouth E, in memory of Miriam and Michael Schiffer's son, Zev David ben Shimon Halevi, David and Mindel Cheslow, in memory of his mother, Bela Bas Meir, Marcia Federbush, a month of learning, in memory of her husband, Uriel ben Harav Shimon, Gary and Marcia Schrager, in memory of his father, David ben Yosef, and his mother, Freda Bas Hendel. We have a week of learning by Shelley and Oscar Moll, in memory of her father, Shlomo Reuven ben Binyamin, by Larry Fish and Vicky Rabinovich Fish, in memory of his father, Avram David ben Shlomo Raphael, and his mother, Batya Chaya Bat Yisrael Yitzchak, Israel Yitzchak. We have a day of learning today, plus Torah Fund, sponsored by Gladys Sherman, in memory of her husband, Aryeh ben Chaim Tzvi Shlomo. And that is it for today. And Shema's have an aliyah, Krank Rafia Velti Yeshira Shema Tzliya, and the whole B'nai Israel a good Gebenchtia. Okay. Tomorrow we have a few and the rest of the week. Okay. All right. So I want to just point out an issue that as we continue with the Gemara, I think it's worth keeping something in mind, and I'm going to tie it to where we are as a lead into picking up for today's daf. Gemara has always been studied in yeshivas in a particular manner, okay, as what I would call a holistic text, right? And by that, what I mean is that you go through the Gemara, you look through the Rashi, you look through Tosafot, sometimes you examine some Rishonim, okay? And as a result, that gives you a sense of what we'll call the Shakla V'Tarya, the back and forth of the discussion in the Gemara, ultimately how Mefarshim understood that back and forth, and ultimately you figure out at some point, if the Gemara doesn't say what the halacha is, okay, hopefully the Rishonim may, through their a number of them come to a conclusion. Okay, academic study of Gemara did not necessarily see the Gemara as a holistic text, right? It saw it as the discussion of ongoing generations and of one generation responding to what was said in another generation. Okay? Why do I bring that up? David mentioned yesterday in the shiur that at times it looks like the Gemara goes off on a tangent. Okay? Right? If we take and understand the academic approach that's taken to Gemara, that quote tangent is really another generation's response to an earlier discussion in the Gemara. Okay, so think, for example, if the moment, if you had a text and it listed all the discussions in the Supreme Court, okay, starting with, let's say, the first Supreme Court in the in the 1780s, right? And you had a situation where one of the judges of the Supreme Court decided they wanted to cite a statement made by, I don't know, give me a famous, somebody, Supreme Court justice from X number of years back. Frankfurter. But I'm thinking even further back. Okay, they're a famous, okay, and cite that and say that his statement in that case makes me ask the following question in regards to this situation. Okay? In a sense, that passage of generations is, in a sense, recorded with Ravina and Rav Ashi and later generations as our text of the Gemara. So if we see, for example, that Rav and Shmuel have a machloket, okay, and then remember they were first generation Amoraim, and then the Gemara asks something about an argument that Abaye and Rava are fourth generation Amoraim, okay, and so they're in a sense picking up the, if you want to say tangent, the discussion of an earlier generation and carrying it and applying it to, okay? So I just wanted to clarify that as we're now going into our Gemara, and we're going to be picking up a new Mishnah today that's going to deal with an important concept. Ha'osek b'mitzvah patur mitzvah. Okay? We're going to deal shortly with a Mishnah that's going to touch on a new concept. Ha'osek b'mitzvah patur mitzvah. Now, that tells me that concept may have initially, okay, been part of the understanding in the time of the Mishnah. But by the time, let's say we get to the time of Abaye and Rava, okay, it may not be clear on what do you base on the Torah that concept. So as we're going to jump into the Mishnah shortly, okay, and I want to make sure these guys are on, yeah, okay, I want us to keep in mind that when we look at a particular, that we understand the flow of the Gemara, okay, not only from that academic point of view, okay, but also from the point of view of the holistic point of view that the yeshiva world has of the Gemara as a text that, having presented a concept that has been accepted over generations, okay, to ask where is the source of that concept or that mitzvah or that thing, okay, doesn't necessarily means that they want to try to derive from that, okay, its foundation. But more than that, how is that concept been passed down and therefore applicable, okay, in other kinds of situations? Okay.
I think he was referring to when sometimes the Gemara says it's discussing the Tana or the Gemara, and then it brings another brisa that Tana happy to say, but has not. It seems like it has nothing to do with what we're learning.
Okay, that's another example of what I would call the editing of the Gemara by Ravina and Rav Ashi, and later, and their students, okay? Because in other words, if you have a statement by Rabbi X here on one topic, and you have a statement by the same Rabbi X on another topic, okay? Where are you going to, how are you going to put that enclose it in a whole discussion? Okay, right. So if you want to maintain, right, when we say, you say something in the name of somebody, okay, so when you want to bring that, you have two choices. You have choice number one, bringing it where when the topic is discussed. That's one option, okay, which is the way we might today do it. Or the other option is to say, since so-and-so has been cited on topic A, okay, I'm going to bring what so-and-so also says on topic B. Okay? Even though it may not have something to do with topic A. Right. Okay, exactly. Okay, so
Which is why you find that the Gemara brings one Amora and then brings a whole
citations of what else he has said. Right, exactly.
Why would you do that?
Why?
What else he said has nothing to do with what we discussed.
Because once you've mentioned his name,
By the way,
right, you want to say also, it's since it's a mitzvah to say something b'shem amro, right? Therefore, you want to cite other things, okay? So it may be that a particular sage is cited 3 or 4 times in a section, like we're going to see today, okay? But he may be hardly known in other parts of the Gemara. Okay? Exactly, because otherwise his statement would be lost. Right, right. Okay, so having said that as an introduction, okay, I'm picking up, okay, really on the bottom of, quickly on the bottom of Kaf Daled Amud Beis. Okay, remember we were talking about the fact that how do you guarantee that the walls, okay, whether it, let's say of a tree where the branches hang down, and the Gemara said, what do? We still, like in other cases, we use vines from certain other kinds of growth, and we tie it in place so it doesn't move. Okay, that's what the Gemara was telling us. Okay, so the Gemara says, right? It says, Haka azil va'ate, about 3 lines up from the bottom of Kaf Daled Amud Beis, right? Don't we say that in that kind of case, all right, the branches of the tree are going to also move by the wind, right? Isn't that the situation? He says, Hatamnami da'avid le bahutza v'dafna. Okay, there too, we're going to tie them with palm and bay tree vines, right? Ihachi, if that's the case, netaltel b'kule. Let us say then that the person who's using that as a Shabbos domicile, okay, namely, should be able to carry, like in any other Shabbos situation, 2,000 amah. That's the point. of what the Gemara wants us to understand there. Alama, Amar Rav Huna, Berei de Rav Yoshua. So therefore the Gemara wants to tell us, why then does Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yoshua, state the following? Ein mataltalin bo ela beit satayim. Okay, that you can only carry not 2,000 amah, but only a limited amount, namely beit satayim, which we said was the area large enough to produce a grain in the weight of, okay, 2 seah. All right, so let's assume that for the moment, we'll say that that's half 2,000 amah, or we'll say it's a quarter of some, whatever it is. Okay, so that's where we left off. That's where David left off yesterday.
Our scroll touches to say 5,000 square meters, which is the area of the tabernacle courtyard.
Okay, so that's good.
That's the
So
max.
if it's 5,000
Square
amas, all right, does that seem more than the normal 2,000 amah that a person would go, right?
Little bit.
Okay, so in any case, what's the issue here that we're getting to? Why did Rav Huna Berei de Rav Yoshua state this, that would be the area which that person using that, let's say the foliage hanging area as his Shabbos domicile could use as his, let's say, area, right? Why? Mishum dahave diret tashmishai la'avir. Why? He says, because that area is similar to a house that's temporary, built by a watchman out in the field to be able to watch the produce. Okay? In other words, it's for the open air. It's not for the purpose really of a Shabbos domicile. It's only a temporary situation for him to have protection while he's out watching the produce and things like that. That's what we see. And therefore, v'chol dira de tashmishaha la'avir ein metaltalin bo ela sa'atayim. And because it's not really a true Shabbos residence for all of Shabbos, but only this kind of temporary protection, okay, watch, okay, all right, things like that. There is more of a limit on that facility in terms of how far the person can go, what's their Shabbos domain, right? Okay, now we can continue. All right, Tashma. Listen to the following Braita. Okay, right. So again, now we're back to this question of the wind and the right and causing the branches and things like that. Right. So what happens? Shabbat betal shahu gavoa asara. Let's say that he had to make his Shabbos residence on the top of a hill, right? And the height of the hill is, right, what happens? A certain height, right? It's 10 tfachim high, right? Right? Shahu gavoa asara, v'hume arba amot ad beit sa'atayim. Okay? And so in other words, it's almost like a area of itself, a separate domain, right? V'chein benaka, shahu amok asara. Or likewise, say he had to make his Shabbos domicile in a valley or a cleft of a rock, okay? And there too, it's 10 tfachim deep, all right? And it's by 4 by beit sa'atayim, okay? It's, in other words, it's large enough for the person to be there, okay? V'chein kama katsura v'shibolot makifot ota, all right? Or likewise, let's say he's out in the middle of a field and he's cleared a certain amount of the area in the field, but the corn stalks or the wheat stalks or whatever are so high that they could be almost like walls, okay, again, right? So these are almost like natural walls and could provide an area. All of these examples, mahalech et kula, v'chutzala apayim ama. But in all of these cases, okay, we don't limit the person to Beit Sa'atayim. We say it's like a regular Shabbos domicile, and they can have the Shabbos domain of 2,000 amah. Afagav de ka'azil va'ate. Even though, particularly in the last case of making it in this grain field, and you have these stalks of grain that are theoretically your area, defined area, those are still going to move back and forth because of the wind. And therefore, that's what we're comparing to the whole issue of a sukkah, right? So what happens? Hatam nami the avid le b'chutza b'dafna. There too, we're saying that it's possible for him to take those sheaves of grain or those individual stalks of grain to tie them, okay, somehow with vines from a bay tree and a palm tree or whatever, okay, so that they shouldn't sway that much, and therefore that's our point. Okay.
And that's why a few years ago, the lighters, the canvas sukkahs that everybody used to use,
Right,
used to blow in the wind,
mhm,
they started selling string ropes that you put
Right.
around to hold
so
them
exactly,
together
right. Uh-huh.
Somehow the sways
a little bit.
Yeah, it's still going to sway slightly, but the idea is so that you can put it, all right, tie it around the outside, right, from, okay. Here we get to our new Mishnah, which is going to initially deal with the issue. We've dealt with number one, the schach. We've dealt with number two, the walls, okay? We've dealt with a number of examples of if the odor in the sukkah is such that it's a negative, that exempts you from being there. So we're now coming to another issue of, are there other situations where there may be individuals who are exempt from the requirement of the mitzvah of sukkah? And our Mishnah tells us, shluchei mitzvah p'turim min hasukkah. Those who are on a mitzvah-oriented mission, okay, are exempt from the mitzvah of sukkah, right? Now, what are you going to ask me, Sam? Okay, how do we define a mitzvah-oriented mission, right? Okay, so that's what the Mishnah and then the Gemara is going to have to deal with. But initially, they want to ask the question, what's the origin of that idea? Okay, so let's go on. Cholim shehen pturim min hasukah. We also say that one who is sick and those who serve them are also exempt from sukkah. Ochlin v'shotin ari chutz l'sukkah. And if one is eating or drinking only a temporary, all right, or a snack, that's a good example. Okay, one is exempt from doing it in the sukkah. Okay, now having
come out from this Mishnah,
yeah,
simply that the people that went or regal on Sukkot are potter from the sukkah in Yerushalayim because they're shluchei mitzvah.
okay, I'll accept that idea.
I mean, you could.
That one could present that, right?
Right.
Okay.
I'm wearing scissors, I'm doing the mitzvah, so I don't have to learn.
That's the question. So we're going to, so the point we're going to see is how then do we define what is that mitzvah that makes one exempt? And the Gemara is going to pick up and say, well, what about this example? What about this example? Okay, I can give, all right? So that's how the Gemara is going to deal with it. But we see what the concept is, right? The Mishnah presents our concept, shluchei mitzvah p'turin from the sukkah, and then has to define.
What does this do about Shuvah Mitzvah?
What?
We also, I'm not going to get the You're not subject to an accident or something, that's just saying.
We'll see.
What?
Okay, let's see. All right, I don't want to jump ahead of the Gemara. So the Gemara starts off Mina Hani Mili. Remember, that's always key words to tell us on what is it based. What are they looking for? They're looking for a Torah-oriented text that they can hang it on. Okay? Right? So the Tanu Rabbanan is taught elsewhere in a Braita. B'shivtecha b'veitecha. We all know those words, when you lie down and when you are in your house. Okay? Prat la'osek mitzvah, b'mitzvah, with the exception of one who is involved in a mitzvah. But we also have a text, uvelechtecha v'derech, when you go along your way. Prat l'chatan, with the exception of a groom. Okay? So what does that mean? Mikan amru, from here that we learn the following. Hakones et habetula patur, one who is involved in a marriage to a virgin is exempt. Ve'et ha'almana chayav, the one who is involved in marrying a widow is still obligated. What are they obligated to recite or exempt from recite? Kriyat Shema. Okay. So in other words, the Gemara is suggesting maybe this is the source to be able to say our concept of ha'osek b'mitzvah patur b'mitzvah. The reason I'm extending this emphasis is so that we're going to see the Gemara is going to have to come back and say, no, that maybe, but maybe we have another source. Okay? My mashma, what does that come to tell us? Amar Rav Huna kederech, okay, as in the way. Ma derech reshut, av kol reshut. Okay? The question is one doing it on their way out of their own desire, out of a non-obligation, discretionary act, or is one doing it because it is a mitzvah, a commanded Torah act? All right? Af kol reshut. So likewise, any discretionary act. La fuki hai de b'mitzvah asut. To exclude that in which one is actually involved in carrying out what I'll call a true mitzvah. Okay? Milo askinin de ka'azil davar mitzvah. Aren't we saying then that we're dealing with somebody who is doing an actual mitzvah? V'ka'amar rachmana. And therefore the Torah says, l'krei, to call, to say, im kain le'makra, okay, b'shavet u'belechet. Okay, if you were going to say that the person has to be clearly involved in doing a mitzvah, why is the language of the pasuk then, right, the way it's stated? It could have been stated as one is sitting, as one is walking or doing or going, right? My b'shiftecha uvelechtecha. Why then is the language of the pasuk as you lie down, all right, or as you go? Belechet didach hu demechayev. Okay, but it depends on the obligation. As you go, that's where the question of your liability, your obligation is.
Personal, you don't have your own
Okay,
person.
ha belechet de mitzvah petita. Okay, but when you go for doing a mitzvah, then you have an exemption. Then you're exempt. Ihachi. If that's the case, says the Gemara, all right, maybe I'm going to say, afilu kones et ha'almana, nami kones et ha'betula, tarid, okay, that if one is engaged in the act of marrying, consummating the relationship, okay, because remember the oraita, kesef, shtar, or bia were the means by which one formalized the relationship. It's only the rabbis that said you needed all three. Okay, so that again tells us, all right, maybe this for the same reason, that also, you're saying the person is tarid. He is focused on fulfilling that mitzvah and therefore should be exempt as well. Why then did we say it was only applicable to the situation of the betula? Okay, 3. Kones almana lo tarid. Does that mean that with he's relating to the widow, he's not so focused on the mitzvah? His mind is not preoccupied. That would be a good translation. The kol heicha de tarid. And if you're going to say if a person's mind is preoccupied with something, and therefore that's why they can't focus on doing the Kriyat Shema, okay, v'hol heicha de tarid, wherever the hachanami de patur, that therefore that's the reason that they would be exempt, right? Elame ata. If that's the case now, then let's say take a following example. Tav'as finato bayam. Let's say he was a merchant and he had the goods on a ship and the ship sunk. Okay, what is he doing? His mind is on the loss of his produce or his goods, his commerce, right? Tav'as finato bayam de tarid. Therefore, he's preoccupied with that. Achanami de patur. Here too, then he should become exempt. V'chitema. And if you want to say, Achanami, here too, V'amar Rabbi Abba Bar Zavta, Amar Rav, that whereas Rav Abba Bar Zavta, the name of Rav, tells us as follows, Aval chayav b'chol hamitzvot ha'amura b'torah chutz min ha'tfilim, okay, that one in a certain situation, namely the example of a mourner, okay, on the first day of his mourning, okay, is still required to observe all the mitzvot with the exception of tefillin. Sheharei ne'emar bahen pa'eh. But there I might argue that that's not the case because he's tarid, he's preoccupied as a mourner. We have a different reason that he is exempt from tefillin on that day.
But he's high and
But chayav
and
other
everything
mitzvahs,
else
other
is safe,
mitzvahs, right.
even though he's
Right,
tired.
exactly. Why? Because tefillin are called pe'er, glorification. Okay? And therefore, hacha, tarid, tirda, the mitzvah. And therefore, we might say, in that case, he's preoccupied with the focus of a mitzvah. Hatam tarid, tirda, the reshut. But there, in that case, okay, he's preoccupied in the boat case, he's preoccupied with something of a discretionary issue, a non-mitzvah issue, right? V'ha'osek b'mitzvah, patur mitzvah, and one indulging in a mitzvah is exempt from a mitzvah. Mehacha nafka, could we derive it from that case? Okay, from something else? Mehatam nafka. Maybe we're going to derive it from another example, a different situation, not from those verses taken from the Shema. What else could we find? Titania. We find it in the following Braita, namely the following. Vahi anashim asher hayu tmeim lenefesh adam v'gomer. We're taking the example of Pesach Sheni, okay, where it clearly says those individuals who were ritually impure and therefore could not bring their Korban Pesach on the appropriate date of the 14th of Nisan, the Torah itself mandates another date that gives them the opportunity to fulfill that mitzvah of Korban Pesach on the 14th of Iyar, okay? And therefore maybe we could use that as a Torah origin to understand our concept of Hosek b'mitzvah patur min ha-mitzvah, right? So now the Gemara says, wait a second, you want to suggest that there were people that were ritually impure? Who is the Torah referring to, right? Va'otam anashim mihayu. So what people might those have been? I'll give you an example, says the Gemara. No say arono shel Yosef. Okay, hayu. Dehivrei Rabbi Yossi Aglili. According to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, there were individuals who brought up the Aron of Yosef and carried it with them during the entire time to bring it and bury it in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so that was his view. Let's go over to the next Amud, right? But Rabbi Akiva Omer, he suggests maybe there was a different individuals. Mishael ve'el Tzafon hayu. He says those were the two uncles of Nadav and Avihu. Hayu shahayu oskin b'Nadav v'Avihu. That they were the ones, okay, who had to remove the bodies of Nadav and Avihu after they were involved in the Eish Zara issue, right? So they became ritually tamim. Now, another example. Rabbi Yitzchak disagrees and says, hold on a second, Rabbi Yossi Aglili and Rabbi Akiva. You gave two examples of individuals who you think could have been ritually impure. I'm going to tell you that it couldn't have been those examples. Because in both of those cases, as the Gemara is going to tell us momentarily, those individuals should have had enough time to become tahor. Why? As we're going to see now. Rabbi Yitzchak Omer, im nosei arono shel Yosef, if they were the ones who carried the aron, the coffin of Yosef hayu, kfar hayu yicholin litaher, they would have had enough time when Bnei Yisrael were camped at Mount Sinai, because they were there an extended period of time, a number of months, right? They should have had enough time to become tahor. Furthermore, he argues, right? Im Mishael ve'el Tzafan hayu. Okay, Rabbi Akiva, you argue it, you suggest it could have been the two of them. They're also, I'll argue with you and say, no, they also would have had enough time to become tahor. Why? Because Nadav and Avihu died on the 1st of Nisan, and Pesach is until the 14th of Nisan. So again, they should have had enough time, okay? If to say, if you got to wait 7 days, there still would have been enough time for them to become tahor before necessary bringing the Korban Pesach. Okay, we'll see if the Gemara raises. Okay? Yicholin hayu l'taher. It could be that they would have had the time to become pure tahor. Ela oskin b'meit mitzvah hayu. Rather, there were other individuals. We determined that why else would the Torah have said if certain people are tamei, okay, and therefore they couldn't bring their korban pesach, that it gives them a second opportunity. Why else would the Torah have given them an opportunity? It must mean clearly that they were logically unavailable for some reason to bring their korban pesach on the 14th of Nisan, right? So they try to bring these examples, right? Rav Yitzchak just knocked out the first two of Rabbi Yossi Aglili and Rabbi Akiva, but now he's saying, no, there were other people who were dealing with their own, let's say, family members, and what happened, right? Oskim b'meit mitzvah hayu, shechal shvi'i shelahem, liot be'erev Pesach. And the 7th day, when their tumah would be finished, and would be the time for them to go to mikvah, okay, or to become tahor, it was Erev Pesach, and therefore they would not have had the opportunity to do so. Shene'amar v'lo yachlu la'asot ha'Pesach bayom hahu. and they were not able to bring the Pesach, Korban Pesach, on that
That day.
particular day of the 14th of Nisan. B'yom hahu ein yicholin la'asot. On that particular day, they were not able to bring it. Halemachar yicholin la'asot. But for the next day, they would have been able to bring
Why
it.
did the Gemara bring before the case of someone who's in a storm? That's not that it's.
No, there it brought that case to try to raise the question if you're simply arguing that if one is preoccupied, and it wasn't the person, it was a person whose commerce was on a ship in a storm. So you might have thought, gee, if there's any reason of preoccupation, maybe that's the explanation that would give me. But it's not. Well, the Gemara is not finished that. In other words, it didn't find that a satisfactory answer. So then it sought this other example from the rhetorical requirement of bringing Korban Pesach on an alternative date. So, okay, so, and that certainly is a mitzvah Korban Pesach, right? What?
No, that's why.
Nothing to do with the storm. So now I'm going to say, wait a second. You gave me one example, okay? Now you brought me another source, a second source. Why do I have to have a discussion, two separate sources, right? Remember my initial question was Mina Hani Mili. What was the biblical example? What was the biblical origin? So let's come back now, all right? Sricha, says the Gemara. We need it. In other words, we need both cases. We need both examples. The Iyashme'inin Hatam, because if I had only learned it there, namely in my earlier case,
A case of shame.
okay, Mishum Delot Mate Zman Chiyuva de Pesach. In other words, had I not learned it in my second example, right? Namely of the case of the time of the obligation of the Korban Pesach. Aval hacha demate zman kriyat shma emelo. But here, where maybe in regards to the situation of the groom, I could argue, well, maybe he would have had time. He satisfied his intended, okay, and therefore still have time to say kriyat shma at night, okay. Tzricha. I said, maybe no. Tzricha. Therefore, I needed that case. I needed that example. Ve'iyash me'inin hacha. And if I had learned it here, namely my earlier case. By the way, notice that the Gemara is arguing here in what we've called chiastic structure. A, B, B, A. Okay, it first dealt with the second example. Now it's going back to the earlier, the first example. Okay, very common Gemara logic. Okay, all right, so what happens? Ve'iyashmin and hach. And if I say here, mishum deleke kare, I might say there, okay, maybe I can't rely on that particular example because it's unique, because there's a punishment of kare in regards to not bringing Korban Pesach. And maybe that's why the Torah gave me an example of Osek b'mitzvah, patur mitzvah. Okay? Because I have a strict punishment there. Okay? Aval hatam. But in my earlier case of the groom, right? The ika, right? Aval hatam, right? The ika kare. But there, okay, in that case of the Pesach, the ika karet, where we do have the punishment of karet, right? Ema lo, I might say no, that's not the case. It's shricha. Therefore, I say yes, I need that. So the Torah. So at this point, the Gemara has come to a conclusion for us. I needed to use both examples to justify a Torah basis for the concept ha'osek b'mitzvah patur mitzvah. Okay. Now, what do we see? in the discussion, the Gemara raised an issue. Okay? It only as a, I hate to use the word tangential, but that's what it was, as a side argument. So we come back to that. Okay? Here's again, by the way, where we see Gufa. All right? We come back to the that issue in the Gemara. But again, academic study would say that must have been a statement added to the Gemara by Ravina, Ravashi, and their students to tell us, wait a second, we didn't deal with that when it was brought up, but we have to deal with it now. Okay? So Gufa, let's go on. Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Zavda, Amar Rav. Okay? We cited him, now we come back to what he said. Okay, Avel chayav b'chol mitzvot amorot b'Torah chutz mitfilin shaharei ne'amar bahen pa'er. We recite what was stated there because now we're going to discuss it in detail. Right? Mida'amar le Rachman. What basis is this that says that the mourner is only exempt, right, with the tefillin and not with other mitzvahs? Since we were asking for a scriptural basis, I'm going to do the same thing. As in the example that Hashem says to the prophet Ezekiel, okay, Pa'ercha chavush alayich v'gomer. He told him basically, you are not to glorify. In other words, don the glory.
Put
Okay.
on your tefillin.
Okay? Okay? In other words, others,
You put on
right.
tefillin, but everybody else is part.
right. In other words, your situation is going to be different than others. Okay, the normal person, okay, would not put on tefillin. In your case, you are going to put on tefillin, right? Okay, pa'ercha chavush alecha, right? Athu the mechayevet, aval kule alma petire, but everybody else would be exempt. Okay, what happens? Vahani mili biyom rishon, and this is on the first day. Tichtiv va'ach rita kayom mar, right? Because we say her end is like a bitter day, so implying that it's only one day. Okay? Now, va'amar Rabbi Abba Bar Zavda Amar Rav. Since we cited him, a statement he said about the Avel of Morna, we'll bring another statement that he says. Avel chayav b'sukkah. Notice, by the way, now when we ask, how come? All right. Why? Because now they're bringing both. They're associating him by name, another statement, but they're also bringing it back to the general topic. Okay? Pshita, isn't that obvious? Mahu detena. What then are you trying to tell us? Ho'il va'amar Rabbi Abba Bar Zavta Amar Rav. Mitzta'er patur min hasukah. We raised the question that we learned earlier. Okay, that somebody who is mitzta'er, who is suffering. Okay, we'll use that translation. Thank you, Mel. Okay, he is exempt from the sukkah. Hi, nami mitzta'er. Okay, but can't we say that the person who is a mourner is also in suffering and should therefore be exempt? How can you say then that he is still required to be observing all mitzvot, such as eating, etc., drinking it in sukkah? Kamash malan comes to teach us, right? Hani mili sara de mamela. Here we're talking about a situation of suffering in general. But here I'm going to translate it. Here he's in a situation of perhaps personal suffering. It's not suffering due to the sukkah situation.
Right. The tzar comes from the sukkah. It's cold. It's hot.
Right. Okay. Ibayale lituve da'ate. Okay. What he needs to do then is calm his mind. In other words, deal with his sense of loss, okay, but at the same time satisfy the requirement of being in the sukkah. Ibaile, okay, oh, so I read that, right? Ibaile v'ituve da'ate. It needs to come as mine. Now we go on. Va'amar Rav Abba Bar Zavda Amar Rav. Okay, another statement he said. Chatan v'hashush b'nei v'chol b'nei hachupa p'turin min hasukkah kol shiva. A groom and those celebrants around with him, okay, are exempt from the sukkah for all 7 days. My Tama, what's the reasoning? Mishum deba'u l'michtei, because they are required to rejoice with him. I didn't like, I don't remember whether it was Art Scroll or Koren said to eat. Okay, I like the translation to rejoice because that way that includes not just the eating at the Suda, but other activities there, right? Now, what's the point? So the Gemara suggests, v'lichlu b'sukkah, v'lichdu b'sukkah. So let them eat in the sukkah and rejoice with the groom in the sukkah. Okay, the Gemara answers, ein simcha ela b'chuppah. We call the rejoicing at the occasion of what's associated with the chuppah. So the Gemara suggests, v'lichlu b'sukkah, v'lichdu b'chuppah. So let him eat in the sukkah and let him rejoice at the chuppah. Okay. The Gemara answers, ein simcha ela b'makom sa'uda. There is no real rejoicing except at the meal that we have the wedding banquet. Okay. Why? Because that's when we always celebrate and we have the repetition of the Sheva brachas. Okay? V'le avdo chuppah b'sukkah. So Gemara comes back with another suggestion. So fine, let him make the chuppah inside the sukkah. Okay? In a hurry, you'd nearly need a big sukkah, right? Abaye Amar. Okay, I bet you never took pictures like that, huh? Sid, right? Okay. Okay. Abaye says, Amar Mishum Yichud. Abaye says, why don't they make the chuppah in the sukkah? Why? It's because of Yichud, because of the bride and groom having to deal with their personal interrelationship. Okay? V'Rava Amar Mishum Tsar Chatan. And Rava says, no, the answer is because of the discomfort of the groom. Okay? My Beinayu asks the Gemara, so what's the difference between their two explanations in this case? Ika Beinayu, Tishchiche Inshe, the Nafke Va'aile Lahat. Why? Because, says the Gemara, there are people coming and going in the sukkah. Okay? In other words, they had maybe a single sukkah, all right, for the community, all right? And therefore, there are always people coming and going. Laman da'amar mishum yichud leka. According to the one by who said that it was because of their yichud, that's not the case.
If the chassan goes out, the
Well,
cow is
we're
alone
gonna
with-
get to that in a second. You're right. Okay, all right. Why is it also? It's not just because the chassan cannot perform what's required as yichud.
Right.
Let's assume that also there's a chance that the chassan has to exit for some reason the sukkah, and other individuals, males in particular, might be in the sukkah with that bride.
That's yichud.
That would be being alone with an individual, and that's nicht good. Okay? All right, and that's not good. Laman damar mishum tsar chatan, according to the one that who argues that was Rabbah, that there is discomfort for the groom, Ika. There clearly that would be a reason not to have the chuppah and kedushin and everything in the sukkah. Okay? Amar Rabbi Zera, says Rabbi Zera. Hold on, he says. Ana achle b'sukkah v'chade b'chuppah. He says, I was able to eat in the sukkah and able also to rejoice and rejoice at the chuppah. Okay, the kol shekain the chade lebai, and all the more so, he says that I was able to rejoice in my heart, right? The ka'avidna tarte, that I was able to do both. In other words, I was able to fulfill both mitzvahs.
Even
Okay.
a sukkah.
V'sameach chatan v'kala, and eat in the sukkah. So don't say it's totally, okay, impossible.
It looks like then Yichud was not symbolic of our Yichud. Then Yichud
Was mamash yichud, right? Right. That's why I suggested earlier, remember, the Oraita was Kesef Shtar and Mia, and it's the Rabbanan that you required all three. Okay? And
I
okay.
have a problem with Ein Ma'aber Simcha B'Simcha.
Ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. On this issue. On this
More or
issue.
less.
Okay, I can see that because you could say, how come you have the chuppah? All right,
You have the chuppah before Sukkot.
right?
Right.
Well, you
And
do
Sukkot
have-
at night becomes Sukkot. So what am I doing? Ein Ma'aber Simcha B'Simcha.
Right, but if I had the chuppah separate, okay, and then I have sukkahs, do I do Sheva brachas in the sukkah?
Before Sukkot begins.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that has to
So-
get married.
No, Shav brachas, you don't have to worry about.
I didn't say Sheva brachas.
Right,
No, he,
right.
I've only seen one wedding, which was Erev Shabbos before Shabbos. I
Yeah.
know one wedding was that.
Yeah, they did a wedding before
Before
Shabbos.
Shabbos,
Yeah,
and it was Rav Hutner's on Ravacha's daughter's wedding,
yeah,
which was Erev Shabbos, and the Sheva brachas was out in Vegas in Atlantic City.
yeah.
That's, I'm just saying, that I can understand.
Uh-huh. That's why they did it Friday afternoon.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Well, you
Okay.
can't get married on Shabbos.
Right.
I didn't say that. I
No,
said
no,
they got
but the
married
point is,
Erev
Erev Shabbos, okay,
And the Shabbat brachos was everybody came
Shabbos
on
and that.
Shabbat, but it was simply when Aim over some Simcha.
Yeah.
Also want to tell you right now that the island has become so firm in some cases that they have separate yichud groups.
okay, all right, now,
Muncie.
Hey, Mansi, yeah. Tanu Rabbanan, he says, as we finish up today. All right, the Braita. Chatan v'shush banim, v'chol b'nei chuppah p'turim min hatfilah. Since we mentioned already again the groom and his celebrants, all right? All right, what would happen? We say they're exempt from what? From Shmona Esrei. All right, now, Umin hatfilin, and they're also exempt, he says, from putting on tefillin in the morning. The chayavin b'kriyat shema, but they are obligated in kriyat shema. I'm thinking of the wedding I just went to this recently, where depends on how much they drank, whether that would be.
Oh, boy.
Okay, I'm just going to finish up a little bit on the top of Kaf Vav because it's a long Amud for tomorrow, and I don't want us to. And it's Torah reading day, so I don't want us to be here till noon. All right, Mishum Rabbi Shila, based on the view of Rabbi Shila, who disagrees. What does he say? Amru Chatan Patur, that the groom is exempt. V'hashush banin v'chol b'nei hachuppah chayavim. And the celebrants are, however, obligated to recite it. Tanya Amar Rabbi Hananya Bar Akiva. Okay, we're going to then get to that tomorrow as we start with this question of, are there anybody else who are exempt in other situations? Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you.